Well, they're finally here. The most hotly anticipated contract numbers maybe in Seahawks history. We have all of the final details today on the Cooper Kupp and Sam Darnold contracts, as well as Demarcus Lawrence. And so now we know what the big picture looks like. Just how much cap space do the Seahawks have available at the moment? How much do they have available next year? What it all might mean. We'll give you that quick update. New numbers are in. Up next on Seahawks Forever.
Welcome to the Seahawks Forever podcast. In-depth analysis on everything Seahawks. And now, here's your host, Dan Viens.
All right, you guys, welcome back. Be sure to subscribe, hit that bell for notification of future episodes. This is just going to be a quick one, just to recap and update where we are with the salary cap now that we have the numbers. By the way, all the other ways you can support the show are listed down below. Also, just a quick programming reminder that tonight I will be reacting to John Schneider's weekly radio show, usually on Thursdays. It was moved up to today at 4 p.m. Pacific time. So as soon as that is complete and it hits YouTube, I will do a reaction show for that, and I'll premiere it live so we can chat about it together as well. All right, time for the glasses to go on, so we can go over all of this together. I took a glance at it, but I wanted to kind of have this be as organic and in the moment, real time reaction as we could get to these numbers. Now, there was some confusion around Sam Darnold's contract last week when Pro Football Talk came out with some of the basic numbers of how the first year money was structured and some of the guarantees, but it didn't have the signing bonus and it didn't have void years. And that's what we now know. And we'll take a look at that in a second. And so that first year cap hit, when it was first reported by PFT, a lot of people picked that up and ran with it, that it was a very unique structure and that it was a $37.5 million cap hit in year one, which, if that had been the case, would have been creative and a little bit groundbreaking and new for how the Seahawks operate, but it would have made some sense too. Use your available cap space now, take advantage of the trades, and then in the event that it doesn't work out with Sam Darnold, you can easily move on from him after a year, and your cap is still pretty clean moving forward. A lot of times when the Seahawks sign these big contracts or big extensions, and we'll talk about that in a second, they do the lower cap hit up front, and then they bury one of the larger cap hits in year two, knowing that they can then do a restructure if they get there and they need to. Well, that's not the case with Sam Darnold's contract. So first of all, big picture right now, I tweeted this out as soon as these numbers came out. $36.3 million in cap space is where the Seahawks sit today. And that's with, as far as I can tell, everything on here. A couple of the minor moves, the tight end from the 49ers yesterday, moves like that, as long as they're not, here, I'll scroll down here and you can see where the cutoff is. This time of year, only your top 51 salaries impact the salary cap. It's not until we get closer to the season that everything has to be accounted for. And that's where you hear the term effective cap space. So this is gross cap space we're talking about here. You're not accounting for draft picks, practice squad, injury reserve, contingencies. The Seahawks always like to hold some back so they can be flexible at the trade deadline and make a move if they need to. So this time of year, only your top 51 salaries. And you can see what happens here. If you can see that on the screen, once you get down here, in fact, they've got all sorts of room to play with. So once you get down to past Chris Stoll, your long snapper, you're down into the Tyler Hall, Patrick O'Connell, Jaron Hall, AJ Finley. These are practice squad players, essentially. They're all making the veteran minimum, the minimum cap number, which is, as you can see here, it's $1.03 million. So the bottom 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, the bottom 10 players all have that same exact cap hit. So anyone else you add, and you can see down below the cap hit now, Cody White, Brady Russell, River Craycraft, who was just signed a few days ago. These guys are all the same number, so they don't impact that number at all. So any other minor signings that look like the type of signings that are minimum deals aren't going to impact the cap. So this is basically where we are, right? Now, there could be cap casualties after the draft. Maybe a veteran that they're not expecting to be available becomes available. There certainly could be a trade in either way. But there aren't a whole lot of levers left to pull now. There is one. And you see it right there, that second number, Noah Fant, still carrying a $13.4 million cap hit going into this season, the last year of his 2-year deal he signed last year. Now, they could trade or cut him, and they would save $8.9 million against the salary cap with a $4.5 million dead cap hit. Here's the thing, though. As much as I don't think any of us agree that Noah Fant is a $13.4 million a year player, we certainly all have felt at some point that he could be worth that if they fully unlock him. But here's the thing. You don't have to do anything with that cap hit. You don't have to do anything at all. But it does give you flexibility depending on what happens in the draft or maybe some other player acquisitions between now and then, that there is that lever they could go back and pull if they needed to. But what a great luxury. And this is something we haven't seen the Seahawks being able to operate with in quite some time. They're usually so tight against the cap that anytime they want to make one significant move, they have to make another corresponding move to make room for it. Well, here they don't. They could just eat that entire $13.4 million cap hit without impacting the rest of their roster. And that way, if it doesn't work out and they move on from Noah Fant, they don't re-sign him next year. Well, they don't have any dead money left over. So I think that's an advantage. That's pretty cool, right? So $36.3 million in cap space now, $104.8 million next year. That's significant. That comes into play now as well, too. But let's just kind of start at the top. Let's take a look at the Sam Darnold contract, and you'll see the first-year cap hit right there, $13.4 million. It was never going to be $37.5 million. It could have been, but then they would have been really, really tight against the cap. And this is pretty much the number when the initial parameters of the deal were first announced, 3 years, $100.5 million. A lot of the cap experts that we've had here on the show, guys like John Gilbert from Field Goals and Curtis Allen from Seahawks Draft Blog, all sort of estimated that it would be $14-15 million, somewhere in that range. And they're right. Only 4.7% of the total salary cap. Now, you look at the structure, though. Next year, that cap hit goes up to $33.9 million. And if they wanted to move on from him next year, they would have to take a loss. It would free up $8.3 million to spend elsewhere, but it would be a $25.6 million cap hit. Then you see 2027, where the cap hit's $44.9 million. It would be a $25.7 million savings to move on from him with a $19.2 million cap hit. So anytime I'm looking at these big contracts, I always look for the point at which the cap savings outweighs the dead money. Right? Some people freak out about dead money, but it's all about opportunity cost. If you have a player that you think is on your roster that is the cap space is more valuable, and the player you could get with that cap space is more valuable than the loss you incur in dead money, then you make that move. We're seeing the Seahawks do that now. They're willing to take on some dead money in some of these deals that they made and some of the players that they cut because they believed that they could replace that player with somebody who would impact the team in a more positive way on the field, and it would make it worth it to take that dead money on. So essentially what we're talking about here is a 2-year commitment to Sam Darnold, and then you can make a big decision. Now, and we talked about this on the show with Dana O'Gorman. Great conversation, as always. It was good to catch up with her. Go check that show out if you haven't already. Option A here, let's be clear, for the Seahawks is that Sam Darnold is the franchise quarterback. That's the best option for everybody. And it's the preferred option, and it's the one that they're optimistically hoping for. That they found a guy who's 27, 28 years old. Things have clicked. He's really developed. He's turned a corner. He's capable of being a very, very good quarterback at a position it's like a unicorn, right? We talk about it all the time, how hard it is to find. And so it's a 2-year commitment, but if it works out, and he's your, going into the 2027 season, he's your guy and there's no doubt about it. Well, you can look at this and say, oof, a $44.9 million cap hit, that's a lot. Well, that's what Geno's cap hit was going to be this year at the age of 35, right? And if going into the 2027 season, Sam Darnold is that guy, then a $45 million cap hit, especially considering the cap's going to go up 2 more times between now and then. The percentage of the cap right now is 14.4%. It's probably going to be down in single digits by that time. Well, that's an easy cap hit to be able to manage for a guy that'll be his 30-year-old season. You're good to go. That would also be the perfect tipping point for an extension, right? And then they add on a couple of the void years after that. If you were to just move on after the 3rd year, there would still be a $12.8 million dead cap hit in 2028 and $6.4 million in 2029. If they were to just move on from him after the contract, let him walk into free agency or whatever. That's kind of the risk you take in trying to spread this out and make sure that first year cap hit is nice and low. All right, so let's go back. And now let's take a look at Cooper Kupp's contract, right? We knew it was 3 years, $45 million, $15 million average annual value, no void years. And I think considering his age, that's a good thing. And his first year cap hit is $9.35 million, 3.3% of the cap. Okay, now where's his tipping point where the cap savings outweighs the dead money? And it's year 2. It'd be a $17.5 million cap hit next year, or you could move on and save $9.5 million with an $8 million dead cap hit. 2027, at the age of 34, if he's still producing, he's a guy you want on the team. It's an $18 million cap hit. You'd save 14 by moving on from him, though, in year 3. So really, the Cooper Kupp commitment, that's a mouthful, is 1 year, right? Because you could cut him next year and save $9.5 million. And again, the cap's going to go up next year. So I think they were pretty fair to Kupp, like he's getting his money. But if he works out and he has a kind of a resurgence, right, from the age of 32 to 34, and he pulls an Adam Thielen. And the Vikings thought that Thielen's injuries had taken their toll and they moved on from him and he just wasn't going to be able to produce anymore. He goes to Carolina and not only produces, but warrants a second contract. If he does that, and he said at his press conference last week that he feels great, all the physical stuff's good, and John Schneider said he passed all of their medical checks and their deep dive physical with flying colors. He gives you a couple of good solid years, right? Tyler Lockett-esque type years, the last couple of years of his deal. And you're facing a $17.5 million cap hit next year. In the year that you're going to extend JSN, but his first year cap hit would be pretty reasonable as well. So that's how that sits. Take a quick peek at Demarcus Lawrence. I mean, we kind of knew this one, and this is another one where if it doesn't work out, he had the foot injury, which is an isolated thing. He's been durable throughout his career, but at the age of 33, 34, sometimes the wheels just fall off, right? I always liken older players, especially trench players, but also wide receivers, this applies to major league power hitters, right? Like old school DHs. Like when the bat speed slows down enough to impact their game, it just happens overnight. It usually happens in an offseason. They just show up for spring training and they don't have the bat speed they used to. And that tends to happen with these older players. If Demarcus Lawrence, even if he has a good productive 2025, but he just shows up in 26 and the Seahawks are loaded at edge and they want to go younger there, and Lawrence just isn't the player that he used to be, well, they can move on next year in 2026, and save $7 million in cap space with a $4.2 million dead cap hit. And then it would be a $10 million cap savings in 2027. So it's really only a 1-year commitment. They can get out of it next year. I think it's a worthwhile risk. Now, on the subject of, well, what are they going to do with this cap space? Again, a reminder that this is not effective cap space. $36 million goes pretty quickly after the draft, especially because the Seahawks have picked up extra picks. We now have 5 of the top 92 picks, right? So there's a slot value for each one of those picks. that's committed to. It was about $14 million before, so adding a couple of picks, and they could move up. They could add more picks by moving down. It's, roughly somewhere in there, somewhere between, let's say, $14 and $20 million. Right there off the top comes off that $36 million. You also have to account for paying your practice squad. You also have to hold a certain amount back for contingencies and injury reserve. And then, as I mentioned earlier, John Schneider always likes to keep some so they're flexible at the trade deadline. So essentially, you could look at this and say, well, it feels like they're done with major moves, but also it makes sense that they're done, right? It's better to be in this position than where they usually are. And where they usually are at the end of free agency is, we've seen this a number of times over the last few years, where they're tight up against the cap and they need to make moves after the draft as we head into training camp. That's why historically they like to do some of their extensions closer to training camp. That's what I think the plan was going to be this year for DK, because that's their MO. They absolutely wanted to keep him here. They wanted to extend him. Schneider was forthcoming about that. I think he was being genuine about that. I mentioned with Dana last night that you could kind of see when he talked off podium that day that the everything was announced and he spoke to the media for the first time, that he was hurt by that. He was expecting, he had an affinity for DK. He wanted him to stick around. He thought they were going to be able to work that out. But that would have been one of those situations very similar to what happened a couple of years ago, where Devin Witherspoon was the last draft pick to sign, and they had to make another move in order to fit it in the cap. They don't have to do that this year, right? And that was actually one of the things that DK didn't like. He wanted his money, according to that Albert Breer report, he wanted his money now. He wanted to get paid now. He didn't want to wait until July. So it does give you that flexibility. Also, there are extension candidates, right? They could extend Kenneth Walker, Boye Mafe. Although in both of those cases, I don't believe they will. And I don't believe they should. Like, before we go paying Boye Mafe and trying to project the player he might be based on his age and his production to this point, I talk about the Greg Russo contract. He just signed for 4 years and $80 million. I don't want to hand that to Boye Mafe yet. I still am not sure he's that player. So let him play out the contract and then see next year, right? Either let him hit the market, or, hey, the Seahawks have had a pretty good track record of keeping defensive players, and they certainly seem to want to play for Mike McDonald. So I'm not going to worry about that right now. Now that Geno and DK aren't involved, like, I don't really see any big time extension candidates that have to be done. Charles Cross in the last year of his rookie deal, but I think you'll see that they're going to exercise his fifth-year option. That number's not prohibitive, especially with $105 million in cap space available for 2026. So I think you let him play out his fourth year. Then you make a decision next year. So that's where you get into all of this with $105 million being available next year. You can do all those extensions then. Then we're also talking about JSN, Devin Witherspoon going into his fourth year, potentially Reek Woolen. More decisions to be made. So I think, the end result here is that the Seahawks are in really, really good cap space overall. They've got, I think, the heavy lifting done in free agency. They've set themselves up so that they can extend any of their young players that they wish to keep. They'll have flexibility at the trade deadline this year, with the ability to go out and get a big-time difference maker if they need to at a certain position. And if not, and they have a little bit left over, they can roll it more into 2026. And then you've got a roster that's pretty set, right? With an offensive line we know is going to be young, and but set in stone. All those players are going to be back. We know the defense is pretty much locked up for the next couple of years. Like, 2026 could be shaping up to be a really, really fun offseason, because the Seahawks will be in position, quite likely, to be more aggressive than they've been in free agency in quite some time if there's, again, just that one guy to put you over the top. And take a peek at next year's free agent class. I'm not going to do it now. We'll do that when the time is right. You'll see some names. Some guys that could be a lot of fun. But that's, getting way ahead of ourselves. So, hey, the numbers are in. Seahawks salary cap situation is looking great. How do you feel about the roster, though? Look, there's no impact left on the free agent market at this point. I think all you're going to see are those little moves like we've seen the last couple of days, filling out role players, special teams guys, the guys that come in and compete for a spot or compete to give you quality depth. And it's full steam ahead to the draft, which we're talking about a month from tomorrow. 4 weeks from tomorrow, the NFL draft. How much fun is that going to be? Again, tune in tonight. I will be reacting to John Schneider's radio show. I'm sure he'll talk about this stuff. And then hopefully, now that we're kind of putting all this stuff in our rearview mirror, he'll start focusing more on the draft and the draft process. That's what I always enjoy the most about having him on that radio show. It's just that, he had to go blow up the whole offensive roster this year. There's been a lot of other stuff to talk about, right? Until then, subscribe to the show, hit that bell for notification of future episodes. Follow me on Twitter and Blue Sky at Seahawks Forever. Forever and always. Until tonight, go Hawks.